We're following new reporting this morning about an assassination threat against President Trump last month that's just now coming to light. The Washington Post reports President Trump secretly flew out of the July NATO summit in Turkey, not on Air Force One, but on a different military aircraft, while the White House made it appear he was flying on Air Force One. The Post reveals the operation was prompted by an Iranian assassination threat against Trump. According to the Post, Trump boarded the old Air Force One in view of television cameras, leading to reports that he was, in fact, on that aircraft. But minutes later, he was secretly shuttled to a smaller plane via an airport catering truck, typically used to load meals and other supplies pre-flight. The Post cited material reviewed by the newspaper, a U.S. official familiar with the operation, and another person with knowledge of the president's travel. Trump initially flew to the summit in a new Qatari-gifted and retrofitted luxury jet. But before leaving Turkey, he said he would instead fly partway home on an older model Air Force One plane. The swap sparked questions about the security of the Qatar-provided aircraft. After the trip, Trump said the jet would undergo additional upgrades. When asked for comment, a spokesperson for the Pentagon referred questions to the White House. But the White House did not respond directly to questions about the Post reporting. The U.S. Secret Service declined to comment. President Trump is once again emphasizing economic pressure on Iran as the war drags on and the stalemate over the Strait of Hormuz continues. In a Truth Social post yesterday, Trump said that since Iran is seeking war reparations, he intends to do the same, writing that he is demanding compensation from Iran for the deaths of U.S. soldiers and Iranian civilians in recent decades. Iran's foreign ministry spokesman pushed back against this pivot to economic pressure, saying, quote, whenever Washington proves itself incapable of pursuing diplomacy, it retreats into sanctions, and whenever those sanctions fail to produce results, it simply increases the dose. He went on to say, quote, the real risk is that American politicians clinging to this bad habit will instead strangle their own remaining chances of a less humiliating exit from a crisis of their own making. President Trump was also pressed by reporters yesterday about what comes next.
You said this last round of talks was Iran's last chance before decapitation. So what now? What comes next?
You'll find out.
Are you still, are massive escalation, is that still on the table?
Well, we have that, certainly that ability if we want to do that. Yeah, you'll find out.
Joining us now, White House correspondent for The Hill, Julia Manchester. Julia, thanks for being here with us this morning. So just to start off, it's a stunning report that the Secret Service clearly felt like they had to take these precautions to shuttle the president without the press even knowing that was aboard Air Force One, that he was going to be moved to this other military aircraft, all to make it out of Turkey just a month or so ago. I mean, what do you think this says? Yes, obviously, the president was aware of this and knew that there was a threat to his life. But what do you think it says about future negotiations and the ability to end this war with Iran?
Well, look, it gives us an ominous look, I think, into Iran's thinking and really the state of play between the two countries, that there was this threat and that these measures had to be taken in the first place. You know, I thought it was interesting when President Trump was on that flight from the UK after he had taken that now very infamous flight from Turkey and speaking to reporters and essentially said, you know, if I go down, you do too. I think it just shows you the state of play and how dangerous all of this is, even though we've seen the president continue to really, I guess you could say, keep this poker face in terms of pushing back on Iran just as, recently as yesterday, sort of mirroring their demands for reparations. So I think it certainly paints a very ominous picture going forward. And also, you know, even stepping back from Iran, it paints an ominous picture of the president's security that we've been monitoring, not only internationally, but here in the United States. There are a lot of questions about President Trump's security when he travels domestically. But now we know that there have been these threats, these very credible threats internationally.
On Iran, though, it feels as though we're constantly in Groundhog Day with the White House and the president saying that we're almost near a deal. We're going to reach a peace deal in a matter of weeks, in a matter of days. One never materializes, or it falls apart if there's a little bit of talk about actual negotiations. The president threatens more force against Iran, then pulls back. Where exactly are things right now? And what does this mean for the president's party in the midterms?
You know, I don't think we necessarily have a clear idea of where things are. I mean, President Trump is saying yesterday the U.S. has full control of the Strait of Hormuz, that the Navy is very much a presence. But then Iran pushing back saying, no, it's closed. So it's a he said, she said situation. And the window is really closing for Republicans economically ahead of the midterms. We know that this war has obviously had a very negative effect on the global economy, being felt here in the United States in terms of energy prices. And Republicans I've spoken to really since March have said, well, voters won't start paying attention truly until Labor Day. And then that's when the window very much closes for that messaging. But it's very clear when you look at poll numbers, and there's been a slew of polls out this week, last week, showing the president's handling of the war, the economy, very low. I think there's a lot of concern that that's going to be trickling down to Republicans. And there's questions of how do Republicans defend themselves against those attacks.
Labor Day is coming up pretty fast here. And also, I would say I think that voters are pretty aware of the price of gas and the price of groceries that are hitting their pocketbooks. But, Julia, there's also this. President Trump yesterday signed an executive order seeking to reshape vaccine recommendations for children. On the current schedule, children are vaccinated against 18 diseases, but Trump's plan would only vaccinate against 11. His order also calls for the MMR vaccine for measles, mumps, and rubella to be separated into 3 different single shots. It is currently given in 1 dose, and there is no credible evidence that separating them provides a safety advantage. The president also made a dangerous and false claim yesterday about the MMR vaccine.
You have the MMR. We want it in 3 separate vaccinations, given at separate times. Together, there could be a possibility they're quite lethal. And separately, it looks like they are not at all lethal, but just very effective.
And I think I heard you say that the MMR vaccine for measles, mumps, and rubella is quite lethal. Is there any evidence of that?
What I've heard is that there are some people that say it is that way. And I say, well, let's say there's a 5% chance of it. Let's split it up because they do say that given individual MMR, that given individual, there is no impact. In fact, they've said how safe it seems to be. But I've heard when you put them together, they can be explosive.
I think it's really important to stress this point, that there is no medical evidence to support what you just heard from the president. Physicians and scientists have said that the single MMR shot is safe and effective, and that breaking it up could leave children vulnerable to dangerous diseases for longer. President Trump yesterday also repeatedly suggested the number or timing of vaccines could play a role in rising rates of autism, despite scientific consensus and decades of studies that have firmly concluded there is no link. Meanwhile, Republican Senator Bill Cassidy is criticizing President Trump's new executive order splitting up the MMR vaccine. In a social media post, Cassidy, a physician, called the order wrong, saying vaccines are safe and effective and do not cause autism. Cassidy warned that splitting them up would mean more shots, increased hesitancy, and that it would make children less safe. He added that parents should listen to their pediatricians, not an inaccurate executive order. Cassidy supported Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s nomination as health secretary in 2025 after Kennedy assured him he would protect the public health benefits of vaccines. Here is Cassidy defending that decision.
Mr. Kennedy and the administration reached out seeking to reassure me regarding their commitment to protecting the public health benefit of vaccination. To this end, Mr. Kennedy and the administration committed that he and I would have an unprecedentedly close collaborative working relationship if he is confirmed. If confirmed, he will maintain the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices recommendations without changes. CDC will not remove statements on their website pointing out that vaccines do not cause autism. Based on Mr. Kennedy's assurances on vaccines and his platform to positively influence Americans' health, it is my consideration that he will get this done.
Just to be clear right now, there are measles outbreaks across the United States. The CDC reports 2,465 confirmed measles cases as of August 6th of this year. These are recommendations. States dictate policy when it comes to vaccine requirements. This is not necessarily enforceable by the president at all, but there is a danger to this. How are Republicans responding to it?
Well, there's a danger because it's so incredibly confusing for Americans, parents who are trying to figure out, how to vaccinate their children, what schedule they should follow. Look, in terms of how Republicans are responding, I think there is somewhat of a divide within the GOP on this issue. Of course, you have people like Senator Bill Cassidy pushing back on this now. But at the same time, as we mentioned, Bill Cassidy voted to confirm RFK Jr. I think you have a lot of Republicans who privately will push back against this. But we are living in the age, I guess, in the conservative movement of the MAHA movement. And this is something that's, very much pushed by members of that movement. But I think there is a criticism going forward about how this could, not only confuse parents trying to figure out what vaccines to give their children, what schedule to put the children on, but also how much this costs children or parents getting vaccines. We know that with this new recommended schedule from the administration, there's more visits instead of going 6 times versus 2 times. So, and that's something President Trump was asked about yesterday. He said they're looking into it, but still very real concerns going forward.
Right. More visits to the doctor could mean fewer children get these shots, which could lead to disease and in some cases death.